will. I'll just share my screen. Can you see my slides?
Yeah, that's great, thanks.
Thank you. So actually, I'm going to compliment a lot of what Stephen's just said, and I've actually just been making some changes to my slides to think, oh, okay, where do we have synergy and where are we different? So I think the main similarity with Stephen's talk is actually, again, I'm probably a serendipitous statistician. How did I get into this area? And particularly, how did I get into cancer? I'll tell you in a moment. So I certainly didn't have a plan in the same way. And I think one thing that's different is that working in a CTU director, again, it is an academic role. We have academic responsibilities, we're returned in the ref, etc. But we don't have the level of undergraduate teaching that Stephen's just been describing. So how did I get into this area? Well, again, I left school not really knowing what I wanted to do. So I did a maths degree at the University of Birmingham. And actually, whilst I was there, effectively one of my flatmates, my best friend, had Hodgkin's lymphoma. And it got me interested really into disease, medical research. My undergraduate dissertation was actually in about psychiatric referrals and inpatients, because I did some voluntary work in psychiatric hospitals at the time. And putting those two things together told me very much I didn't want to be an accountant. I didn't want that other sort of career. And I was interested in really what drove the sort of evidence behind medical treatments and practice. So having done my MSc at Leicester, again, where do you go for the first job? David Clayton was my supervisor in Leicester, and Julian Peter at the time was working at the Institute of Cancer Research. And I remember it was pointed out to me that Julian had invented the log rank test as his MSc project, and he would be a good boss to have as a sort of first boss. So naively, I came down here in 1985. Around 1990, the head of the sort of stats service unit at the time left. And at the same time, I was sort of a bit preoccupied just going off and getting married. And sort of when I resurfaced after all that, I found that I'd actually become the de facto head of the unit. I had the opportunity to grow the unit and develop. And we had at the time the beginnings of sort of more formal clinical trials units. And actually, it suited me to stay around that point. The Institute has a faculty appointment system. So I got my sort of tenured appointment when I was 29. I think that's probably still the youngest at ICR. And gradually grew the unit and started receiving programme grant support from Cancer Research UK in 1993 onwards. So as the unit grew, we became separate from the section of epidemiology, had a separate section of clinical trials. And then with a further reorganisation, we got put into a bigger division of clinical studies, and I'm the deputy head of that division of clinical studies. So I oversee some of the other work across the unit as well, across the division rather. So at a national level, I now have sort of roles within the UK CRC exec, but particularly in the area of breast cancer, and also sort of part of the TMRP health informatics and StratMed groups. And like Stephen, actually, I sit on the advanced fellowship panels. I was an NHR Senior Investigator Award in 2017 for my sort of contribution particularly across breast cancer trials and trials leadership. Because of collaboration with the meta-analysis work in Oxford, I've had a visiting professorship there. And internationally, I'm a member of the executive board of an organisation called the Breast International Group, which really pulls together breast cancer researchers internationally. And actually, as of this week, so I can't help putting it on, the whole group of breast cancer researchers at ICR and RM, the Royal Marsden, have been awarded a Team Science Award by the American Association of Cancer Research. And I haven't actually proved this yet, but I think it's quite likely that this is the first time a statistician has been a recipient on this global Team Science Award. So I've tried to sort of take one for the team there. Anyways, moving on. So for those of you who don't really know about trials, the trials units, across the UK CRC, we have over 50 units across the UK. About 15 of those specialise in cancer, and 8 of them receive core funding from Cancer Research UK. And so the work that I've grown up at CTU has been really sort of fundamental to those 3 structures. So what's ICR? So I don't work, well, we are part of a university, we're part of the University of London, but we are a dedicated cancer research institute, which really designs to take bench to bedside discovery science into the clinic, clinical translation, reverse translation, synergistic development, novel therapeutics. So having some understanding of biology or an interest in biology and drug development, as well as clinical trial methodology, is quite useful. So what do clinical trials do for those people who don't know? So we don't just design, conduct and report trials, we do obviously have lots of collaborations with discovery scientists to work out those trial concepts. We're involved in methods development. We do some teaching, largely postgraduate teaching. We work very closely with patient partners in research and STEM and engagement. We try to influence national policy, both governmental and with regulators. We'll be members of international and external consortia. And the bottom line is we try to influence the clinical research landscape and alter how treatments are available for cancer patients. So I'm just going to give you one example of the type of work that I've been involved in over the years. It's lots of breast cancer trials, but this is actually just focusing on radiotherapy. So when I started, the standard, after the patient has had their tumour removed, it's quite standard for those breast cancer patients to receive radiotherapy to the breast. And when I started out, the standard treatment was to give this over 5 weeks in 25 doses or 25 fractions, as we call it. And we ran some trials called the START trials, that actually showed that if you moderated the total dose properly, you could safely deliver that treatment in 15 fractions over 3 weeks. And then in the last 5 years, we've now published papers about looking at partial breast treatment rather than the whole breast, and actually published 2 papers in the beginning of the pandemic about, again, safe dosage to actually treat in 5 treatments, 5 fractions, getting all of the treatment done in 1 week, rather than the 5 weeks when we started. And we have visions really for the future. So the main reason for showing this not only is sort of where we are now, but just this trajectory that we don't do ad hoc trials, we try to do a sort of whole program of work, which is designed to influence practice. And these are the sort of high level clinical publications that we've had across the Lancet, other high impact journals. We also importantly look at patient reported outcomes. We look at the risk between surgical complications and effects of radiotherapy. So we do a lot of the background and associated research and not just sort of answering the trial question. So focusing on Fast Forward, which is the trial that we published just at the beginning of the pandemic, and we actually pulled that publication forward because of the pandemic. And it was due to be analysed, but let's put it this way, we in the Lancet worked to get it out in a month rather than the sort of several months that it might normally take. And this was the impact we were able to have. This is from the Royal College of Radiologists, that at that time, virtually all of the patients were treated in that 15 fraction regimen, which is the regimen that we'd actually already shown to be beneficial. But that's what standard of care was. And we published Fast Forward in April 2020. And within months, we'd completely changed the landscape of how breast cancer patients were treated in the UK. And many of our clinical colleagues have sort of paid tribute to the fact that we saved them. And we saved, most importantly, patients from being able to actually minimise their COVID risk whilst actually receiving a proper therapeutic treatment during the pandemic. But this isn't just about the pandemic, and obviously hopefully these results will be long lasting, both in the UK and internationally. So that's just to give a snippet of the sort of type of programme of work that I'm involved in. So what's the sort of structure of a CTU? We have directors, we have faculty, we have senior principal statisticians, these are really experienced people, and clinical trial programme managers. We have then sort of whole project funded statisticians, trial managers, etc. And then operations posts and IT posts to support that. And obviously those roles differ across the unit, but particularly in terms of the statistics, we're involved in the stats design and sample size, the analysis plan, the monitoring, the analysis of the data and the reporting of results. But I show this slide overall to show you that I started life as a statistician, but clearly I am responsible as a CTU director for activities far broader than the statistical conduct of the trials, and also the science of the trials and the trial management side as well. And this slide, which I'm just going to whiz through, but just as a design to sort of just show you that, again, there's more to a trial than sort of just getting a result at the end. In concept stage, we'll work with our clinical partners to define the question, to do the appropriate literature searches, to work out the sample size. We might be working with industry partners as well as national clinicians to really work out the sort of statistical design considerations around the trial. During the trial, obviously, we have a responsibility to set this up properly and all the appropriate governance in place, designing the CRFs, working with all our partners to then sort of formally get approvals to start the trial. And this is actually just a graphic that we like, so we show quite often. It's actually a trial of, so you got 81 patients in, but it shows you the number of people involved, excuse me, across all our stakeholder partners in the sort of broader sort of science and the approvals and governance around the trial. So whilst the trial is ongoing, the statisticians will have responsibility for monitoring the interim data and looking at data completeness. But obviously the trials unit needs to make sure that all the drug supply is appropriate and everything else that happens and the governance completes happenings, and sites are well supported. And then obviously it comes to analysis. We've had the IDMC by this point throughout the trial, and eventually there'll be, the paper, there'll be a presentation, usually by the clinical lead, but can be by the methodology lead. I've given presentations at major meetings as well, which is great. And then we report the trials and then hope for implementation, if appropriate. So just then coming to reflect, I'm conscious I've gone through this quite quickly, but in the interest of time, that's what I wanted to cover. So what is the life of a CTU director? Depending on my mood, I could probably give you lots of versions of this, but the bottom line is that you have to love teamwork, but you also have to prepare to play sort of second fiddle to the clinical lead a lot of the time. I'm a great advocate. Many of you who know me will have heard me shout about this politely, that we are there as academic collaborators. We're not there providing us support. And so I do firmly believe that we are partners in this research, but sometimes those relationships can be a bit tense. We do get this sort of intellectual and academic output. We might be joint first or last author on high profile clinical papers, tend to have a very high index, H index. We'll be joint lead applicants on grants, and so we are true academic partners in this. There was a trial that I was involved in back in the 90s, the intergroup exemestane trial that we ran in partnership with Pfizer. And unlike Stephen, I did manage to get a drug to market. And this actually led to the licensing of exemestane for the treatment of postmenopausal women. And these were the sort of headlines that were around the world at the time, which was quite fun. And it also obviously led, in addition to sort of giving presentations sort of in front of 10,000 people at these major clinical meetings, and they go, oh, it's a statistician standing up there, not a doctor. And you go, yeah, and I can do it. But also I was invited to go and give talks in interesting places, and I've just listed 3, which was sort of Rome, Mykonos, which was an interesting one, and Shanghai, which was, when I was growing up at school, I probably never thought I'd be giving a talk to doctors in Shanghai, and that was a real highlight. So in addition to that, that's all the positive side. There is a lot of bureaucracy around clinical trials, and it perhaps does sort of summarised in the 80-20 ratio, 80% bureaucracy, 20% sort of success and reward. But working in this type of environment, it does give you the opportunity to specialise in a certain disease area. So for myself, it's been breast cancer, and to influence practice. And therefore my reputation will be as a breast cancer statistician internationally, not necessarily for a particular type of methodology expertise. Those national and international collaborations, I think, are fundamental to the role, and I have been extremely fortunate in having lots of opportunities for travel that I'd never envisaged. Perhaps it's a bit tougher to do that these days, but we've had some great times, and this is just one I show that pre a lot of the regulation that we have now, we were running trials in collaboration with colleagues in India, and this was a visit I made to the All India Institute of Medical Sciences in Delhi in 1996, and it was just, you can tell it's a very different place, and it felt a privilege and a huge opportunity to be influencing clinical care for patients, not just in the UK, but in a country where that sort of public health system was well and truly needed and valued. So that's all the good stuff. You do have to be prepared to sort of tolerate the risk-averse culture around trial regulations. There is an opportunity, you need to take the opportunity for your own academic independent research. That will differ for different people. But again, we do PhD, have PhD students, PhD supervisions. I sit on IDMCs, TSCs, and I do a lot of grant reviewing, particularly actually for international grant review organisations. I'm currently doing that for the Swedish government and for the French national charity. I've done others as well. At the end of the day as well, it is a career that's opportunity for flexible part-time working. Many people do juggle care responsibilities, and sometimes think you have to, really put everything in perspective. So I do finish with coming back to the art of this work. How many days do I go home with sort of thinking of the scream, and how days do I go home with a sort of nice, beautiful calmness? I don't know, but I think I've been incredibly fortunate to have the career that I've had, and I hope I have, most importantly, made a difference to cancer patients at the end of the day. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much.